Jasmine Crockett wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. Her voice, low and unwavering, carried the weight of centuries, the focus of fire, and the clarity of someone who had nothing left to prove. ... And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it should, she concluded, eyes locked dead center into the camera. Her final syllables landed like verdicts, not threats. Just facts. For a beat, the room held its breath. Kaitlan Collins, polished, practiced, always ready, didn't speak. Her mouth was set in a tight line. Her eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite mask. Surprise? Discomfort? Respect? The conservative panelist to Crockett's left fidgeted with his notes. He looked for his talking point, but found nothing useful against what had just been said. Because Crockett hadn't played the game. She'd rewritten the script, and the studio usually filled with whispers. Pen clicks, shuffled prep materials was silent. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It was reverence. Awkward for those unready, electrifying for those who needed it. The kind of silence that comes when truth walks into a room already full of noise and commands it to stop. A camera assistant paused mid-step, eyes wide. Producers didn't cut. No commercial break. No redirect. Just Crockett, still seated, still composed, having calmly detonated the idea that respectability was honesty's only vehicle. She'd talked about race, about power, about truth twisted into policy. And she did it without asking for permission, without couching it for comfort. She didn't snap, but the air cracked anyway. Kaitlan finally blinked, as if waking from a trance. Her hand moved toward her earpiece, then stopped. A rare, raw moment for a woman trained to keep every reaction neutral, balanced, safe. But this wasn't safe. It was brave, and somewhere between Crockett's stare and the sudden hush that followed it, you could feel the line redrawn between politics and principle, between posture and purpose. The clip would be viral within the hour. But here, in this room, it wasn't about followers or applause. It was about bearing witness. She had said it, they had heard it, and they would never forget it. But what led to this moment? And why did Kaitlan Collins, the anchor taught to never react, suddenly fall silent? Asterisk 3 days earlier, the invitation came through her scheduler. Dressed in diplomatic language, "We'd love to have Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett join CNN's Evening Roundtable to weigh in on key national issues, economic policy, party messaging, and cultural shifts." Translation: they wanted a show. They just didn't know who the main act would be. Crockett had done enough of these to recognize the pattern. The format pretended to be balanced, but the weight always tilted subtly. One question softened, the other sharpened. One guest floated strategies, the other defended her existence. This wasn't dialogue. It was dissection with good lighting. Backstage in the green room, the vibe was unmistakable. Producers in sleep-deprived headsets whispered tightly paced outlines under their breath. The makeup artist offered her a polite smile and a neutral tone, asking if she preferred a matte finish or a more polished look, Congresswoman. Down the hall, she heard two conservative guests joking, not about policy, but people. About urban rhetoric, emotional Democrats, and identity. Obsessions. Words that seemed casual but warned exactly what room she'd be walking into. She glanced at her reflection. This time, no code switching. No softened speech. She wouldn't leave parts of herself behind. Tonight, she would walk into the room whole and unedited. Because whether they understood it or not, she wasn't here to win a debate. She was here to tell the truth. And truth doesn't ask to be liked. At the panel's helm sat Kaitlan Collins. Impeccably dressed, calm, controlled. Eyes like still water, trained to anchor. Not waver. Kaitlan had built her career threading a needle so thin it became invisible. Civil with senators. Contained with chaos. Always a degree outside the fight. Always watchers asking, why does she press harder on progressives than conservatives? Why does she smile more when the right speaks softly? Not bias, perhaps, but balance poisoned by old expectations? Still, Collins wasn't the enemy. She was the air Crockett had learned to breathe. What she represented was more dangerous than outright hostility. It was decorum dressed as fairness. As Crockett approached the studio floor, her heartbeat didn't rise. It slowed, focused, like a fighter entering a ring not to trade blows but to deliver a message. The chair they gave her was just off-center. Not quite in the light. Not quite in the shadow. Intentional, maybe? But Crockett noticed. She always noticed. The conservative guests looked comfortable, uncrossed legs, casual banter. They didn't see a threat. They saw a seat filled, not a force arriving. But this wasn't the Jasmine Crockett they were expecting. Not the one who danced delicately for networks, twisted her tongue into digestible sound bites. This was the one who carried generations in her jaw, who had been taught to break down arguments in court before ever making headlines as a congresswoman. Tonight's topic list? Inflation, race in politics, generational rifts, public safety, all loaded, all curated, all capable of cutting, but she wouldn't just answer their questions. She'd unravel the assumptions. Behind them, she adjusted her mic, sipped water, smiled across the table. Kaitlan glanced up, meeting her gaze, measured, neutral for now. But no one, not even Collins, could predict the storm Crockett was about to unleash. Televised politics isn't just about what's said. It's about how it's said, ... And who is allowed the space to say it? Beneath studio lights and polished desks lies a quieter strategy. Control the frame. You control the narrative. This is the arena Jasmine Crockett was walking into, a place where balance is theater. Fairness is often filtered through comfort. At first glance, it all looks equal. One Democrat, one Republican, one moderate anchor. Everyone given their turn. But listen closely, and you'll hear the tilt. Not the avalanche of bias. The drizzle of it. Kaitlan Collins is a master of that drizzle. Not a villain. Not a bigot. But something more insidious. Trained neutrality. Her questions to Republicans come softly, inquisitively. Can you walk us through your thinking on this? But when Democrats sit down, it changes. Why haven't you been able to pass that? Don't you think this strategy alienates average Americans? She isn't just asking, she's framing. And framing shapes perception faster than fact ever could. For women like Jasmine Crockett, this isn't new. It's inherited, ask Maxine Waters, whose decades of service could never outrun the media's obsession with her passion. The moment she raised her voice, she was labeled too emotional, as if rage at injustice is anything but sanity. Or Joy Reid, who built an empire of intellect only to have her composure dissected every time she challenged the GOP's talking points. Why is she so aggressive? Commentators asked, even as her debate partners raised their voices without penalty. Or Karine Jean-Pierre, the first black, openly gay White House press secretary. Every briefing, she's expected to be softer, smoother, more diplomatic than predecessors who were never asked to represent entire demographics just to keep their job. Over and over. The same script. Challenge a black woman's expertise by shifting the story from what she says to how she says it. It's not policy. It's tone. It's not truth. It's temperament, and it's not just personal. It's institutional. There's a reason the term angry black. Woman sticks harder than unqualified. White man, the former taps into an old playbook. The coded language of control. Collins doesn't use that term, of course. She never would. But watch her body language. Her lean-ins. Her interruptions. Notice how difficult questions for Republicans come laden with disclaimers. While Democrats are asked to explain why they think America should change at all, it's not outward malice. It's performance built for palatability. Ask yourself, when was the last time a black progressive politician was allowed to simply state their case without having to apologize for their tone, their volume, or their existence? This is what Crockett knew. The trap wasn't obvious. It was polite, polished, institutional. They'd call her bold but not brilliant, passionate but not presidential, authentic but not electable. Because The media knows how to praise you into a corner. So when Crockett took her chair under the soft blue lights of that moderated forum, she wasn't just defending ideas. She was defending the right to be whole in the space. Every question Kaitlan would ask had a subtext. Every raised eyebrow would carry the tremor of judgment. Her tone would remain calm, always calm, but in that calmness lived the old rule: be civil, not too real. And the irony: Kaitlan likely didn't even know she was doing it. That's how deep it goes. You don't have to believe in injustice to uphold it, but Crockett had studied this game her entire life. This wasn't her first debate. It wasn't her first panel. And it certainly wasn't the first time someone would try to package her conviction as aggression. The difference now? She didn't care. She wasn't here to be someone's idea of reasonable. She was here to speak, not soften. Because the job isn't to appear palatable to power. It's to tell the truth in a country that still gets uncomfortable when black women do. The sound guys had checked her levels. The camera angles had been locked down. The questions carefully curated. Everything was in place to play it safe. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't about to play their game. In fact, she came to dismantle the entire board. Long before Jasmine Crockett ever sat in Congress, before her name trended, before news anchors learned to pronounce it with polished precision, she was just a girl growing up in Texas. Watching the world try to tell her who she couldn't be, she was smart. Not the gifted and talented kind the school highlighted, but the quiet smart. The kind who read beneath her desk, who noticed how some kids got extra help and others got lessons in lowering expectations. Her first memory of being underestimated didn't come from a stranger. It came from a guidance. "Counselor, you might want to consider something more practical," they told her. "Law is ... competitive." She never argued. She just wrote it down. Jasmine learned young that the world watched girls like her through a filter. Be ambitious, but not too ambitious. Speak up, but not too much. And if you do succeed, smile. Make them feel like it was their idea. She smiled. But she also didn't forget in college. Scholarships didn't come easily. They came from late nights typed essays. 100 Why I Deserve This, Please. Not once. Every semester. She wasn't born with the safety net others took for granted. Her net was made of grit and receipts, and yet she pushed. She studied. Pushed harder. Paid her way through the law degree brick by brick, while others leveraged family friends for internships. She worked double shifts and still made the dean's list. Becoming a civil rights attorney wasn't a career move. It was a lifeline. She was drawn to the sound of injustice and ran straight into the fire. She defended the voiceless. Families whose names weren't trending. Cases no one would cover. And communities that didn't have the right connections, but still deserved the law to mean something. It didn't always pay well. It didn't always look flashy on a resume, but it mattered. At every step, the game said, play it safe. Join a firm. Climb the ladder. Smile more. Don't disrupt. She disrupted anyway, because for Jasmine Crockett, justice wasn't just a concept teen, it was a commitment. Even when that meant saying no to comfort. No to corporate. No to the kind of life that pays well, looks polished, but never changes anything real. When people use the word radical like an insult, they forget that Rosa Parks was once called radical. That Shirley Chisholm, who ran for president when that idea was unthinkable, was still mocked in rooms that repeated her language decades. Later then came Congress. They didn't see her coming. She didn't climb the old way. No golden Rolodex. No smile and wave handler guiding her into cocktail circuits. She got there because people in her district were tired of being spoken for instead of spoken with. Her rallies weren't just political, they were personal. She wasn't polished. She was prepared because she didn't learn campaign sound bites from consultants. She learned by standing in courtrooms built to silence ordinary people and turning those rooms into stages for truth. When media pundits described her, they used words like outspoken, brash, passionate, but those weren't critiques. Not to her, they were proof she was being heard. And still, they underestimated her, even after she made headlines, even after she tore through hearings with Surgical precision. Even after voters chanted her name. Not for fame, but because she gave them language for their struggle, they still saw her as the one who should wait her turn, smile a little softer, speak a little slower, read the room. But Jasmine Crockett had already read the room, and she'd highlighted every lie inside it. She wasn't seeking permission anymore, because representation doesn't mean imitation. She didn't come to become the system. She came to remind it. This government is supposed to belong to everyone, not just those born closest to power. Her journey challenges everything the media packages as electable. She didn't shrink her edges. She didn't sand down her voice. She didn't ask to be liked before she asked to be heard. And that's exactly why people listened. Behind the smile is steel, behind the fashion is fire, and behind every measured line she delivers is a battlefield of scars no camera could ever capture. Black women in politics aren't just navigating campaigns there, navigating barriers no one else sees until they run into them. Face dash first, Jasmine Crockett saw them all. And still, she chose to walk forward. Every dismissal, every whisper, every segment that cut her mic early or skipped her perspective. She remembered. She didn't harden. She focused. She speaks for people who get called too angry when they ask for clean water, too divisive when they ask for equal pay, too dramatic when they say their lives matter. Those people, she knows them because she is them. And when she walks into any room, be it courtroom, Capetto, or CNN studio, she never comes alone. She carries their stories like armor. She brings their names in her voice. So when Jasmine Crockett sat under those hot studio lights, she wasn't nervous. She was ready. Asterisk, asterisk. The set was pristine. Polished panel desk. LED tickers pulsing soft blue behind them. Faces perfectly lit. Voices mic-checked. Everything engineered to feel calm, objective, under control. At first, the conversation unfolded with the usual choreography. Introductions, polite policy points. Crockett articulated a plan for addressing wealth inequality through community reinvestment. Nothing controversial until it was. A conservative panelist leaned in, tone syrupy with condescension. "Congresswoman, I hear the passion in your voice, and I respect that. But don't you think Americans are tired of the emotional appeals? We need solutions, not slogans." Crockett didn't flinch, but the trap had been laid. Another panelist joined in. "Look, we can all agree racism exists, sure. But some of this rhetoric calling out systemic oppression. Don't you think it turns off working-class voters who don't see themselves in that narrative? That narrative, like her community's lived experience, was some fringe. Storyline America could simply opt out of them. Came the real thrust. Isn't all this focus on race just another way of dividing the country? The Republican guest pushed. What unites us is the flag, not skin color. Jasmine sat still, not stiff but still. Because this wasn't debate, it was framing. And she'd seen it before. The framing they use when they can't win on facts. Reduce a black woman's clarity to emotion, her truth to division, her fight to overexposure. This wasn't disagreement. It was containment. It'd keep her passion boxed in. Make her explain herself. Deflect. Backtrack. And then Kaitlan Collins turned toward her. Smooth. "Cool, Congresswoman," she said. "Careful not to sound pointed. We understand where you're coming from. But do you ever worry that some of your language, especially around race and equity, risks alienating moderates?" There it was. A question disguised as neutrality, laced with accusation. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett heard something more dangerous than the conservative talking points. She heard complicity. Not loud, but sharp. The kind that sounded like concern, but felt like a leash. Moderates as if justice had to first pass through. A panel of comfort before being allowed to speak. Collins wasn't yelling. She wasn't disrespectful. But Jasmine had seen this move before. The media's favorite trick: make the issue about how you fought, not what you fought for. And suddenly the studio felt tight, small, like the air had been trained. To exit the room if she raised her voice, raised her hand, raised their discomfort. She could see it coming. The headlines writing themselves. Crockett clashes with guests. Crockett lashes out on air. They were hoping for the trope. They were baiting it. But Jasmine wasn't here to play rescue roulette for moderates. She was here to tell the truth. It's uncut. To defend the tired, the targeted, the unheard not, the feelings of those clinging to the luxury of neutrality. They tried to back her into a rhetorical corner, but they forgot what happens when you corner a woman who built her life climbing out of boxed-in spaces. Crockett looked at Kaitlan, then at the other panelists, then briefly into the camera, because she always knows who she's really speaking to, the millions of people watching who've been called angry just for being honest, divisive for being visible, emotional for being alive. She smiled, calm, knowing, and just when they thought they'd cornered her, Jasmine exhaled slowly, raised her hand, and changed the temperature in the room. Jasmine Crockett didn't lunge at the bait. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't interrupt, didn't raise her voice. She just leaned forward, and for the first time since they'd all taken their seats, it felt like everyone else was suddenly on defense. "I appreciate the concern about alienating moderates," she began, her tone level as a judge's gavel. "But maybe before we worry about who's uncomfortable, we should ask who's surviving. Because in my district, politics isn't a theory. It's the difference between rent and homelessness, medication and funerals, food on the table or just prayers." A silence cracked through the set. One of the conservative guests glanced away, rifling through nothing in particular. Suddenly unsure if he should be looking at her or the floor, Crockett continued, calmly, cutting deeper, slower than anger, sharper than outrage. "I didn't come to Congress to be liked. I came because people in Texas, people who look like me, pray like me, struggle like me, said we are done waiting." Kaitlan sat still, lips slightly parted. No rebuttal, no rescue, just watching. "When y'all say moderates," Crockett said, turning gently to Collins, "who exactly are we centering? Who gets to be the norm? Because I've never been invited to moderate suffering. Not once." And now she began to rise, not physically, spiritually, each word wrapped in memory, momentum, and the unshakable truth of someone who had seen behind the curtain, stepped back out unbowed. "I'm told that I make people uncomfortable when I speak the truth out loud. That's fine. But understand, unarmed black teens aren't comfortable. Underpaid teachers aren't comfortable. Single mothers with 3 jobs and no PTO aren't comfortable either. So why should I tailor my truth to protect the peace of those who already sit safely?" A hairline crack appeared in Collins' composure. She shifted in her chair, human, barely visible. But Crockett saw it. Words were no longer being exchanged. They were being etched. "If me fighting for black women, for minimum wage workers, for veterans who can't afford insulin, if that's divisive, good. I didn't come to keep the peace. I came to threaten comfort, because comfort has become the prison this country hides injustice inside." Dead still. No one interrupted. The conservative guests weren't even breathing loud. The control room, somewhere behind the glass, had no plan for this. The LED backdrop flickered like it wasn't sure this was the segment they rehearsed. "For I've been called too passionate," she said, eyes glimmering. "But I wasn't too passionate when I shut down attacks on reproductive rights. When I stood on the House floor for hours, filibustering bills that would erase history from our classrooms. When I faced off with men who told me I was too young, too loud, too black to lead, and I led anyway. The panel had nothing. Only glances down. Awkward shuffles. A safe sip of water from someone who rarely needed to drink. I've earned the right to be here. And I don't owe respect to narratives designed solely to contain me. It wasn't theater. It wasn't aggression. It was liberation. And every syllable set someone free." She paused, looked straight into the camera lens. Not as if speaking to viewers, but as if summoning them. All I've ever done is love my people out loud. That's the fight. And if that's polarizing, then maybe America needs to be shaken before it can be healed. A beat. And then, I'm not here for the poll-tested soundbite, she said. I'm here because people are dying with full-time jobs and no health care. Because children are drinking lead from school water fountains. Because policies debated on this panel are lived as crises in real time for families who can't wait for America to get comfortable. She looked at Kaitlan once more. No bitterness. Just unyielding clarity. Moderation is a privilege the hurting can't afford. And with that, studio sat in something rare. Not tension, not discomfort, but awe. Collins didn't react. Couldn't. Her silence wasn't dismissive. It was reverent. You could hear a pin drop, not because the energy vanished, but because reality finally broke through the noise. No cheap comeback. No exit music. No panicked cut dash-to-dash commercial. Just Crockett. Quiet now. Centered, and the weight she carried. Finally seen as promise? Not politics. Moments passed. Then Collins blinked, gently shifted her note cards, and cleared her throat not to speak, but to recover. A subtle gesture, unscripted, but everything had already changed, because no one would remember the 5 talking points from earlier. They'd remember this. A congresswoman. Alone, before a nation that underestimated her. Standing not with fury, but with fierce grace. And that silence. It wasn't awkward. It was sacred. But the internet. The internet was about to go loud. The broadcast hadn't even faded to black before the first clips hit social media. A 34-second snippet, Jasmine Crockett. Centered in frame, hands unmoving, voice clear, started spreading like wildfire. By the time the panel cut to commercial, the caption was already trending. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar. On X, it was hashtag Crockett Effect. Within an hour, it was everywhere. TikTok teens layered her monologue over slow-motion edits and thunderous orchestral music. Instagram Reels mashed her face onto Marvel heroes. Reddit threads titled, "Congresswoman Casts a Political Exorcism on CNN," racked up tens of thousands of upvotes in minutes, and on MSNBC, a mid-hour host declared, "We just witnessed the political equivalent of a lightning strike, rare, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore." Even Fox News aired the moment, clipped, of course, with commentary that tried to frame her as radical, threatening, oppositional. But the internet had already decided. This wasn't defiance. This was truth. Fan dashcams popped up within hours. One soared past 1 million views. There were t-shirts for sale before sunset. Unbossed, unbothered. Crockett 2028. A meme began circulating of Kaitlan Collins, sitting frozen mid-broadcast. Eyes wide just seconds after Jasmine's final line. The caption? That face you make when truth walks in the room. The reactions came fast and loud. Congresswoman Ayanna Presley reposted the clip with 4 words. "We see you, sis." Cardi B tweeted it with a simple, "Sounded like a damn queen." The tweet hit 800,000 likes in under 2 hours. And then there was Meghan McCain, who reposted the video with the cryptic phrase, "This is what happens when you go too far left," then quietly deleted it. The screenshot, of course, lives forever. Politicians, pundits, activists, even athletes chimed in. One NBA player tweeted, "She more presidential than most presidents?" Cable networks scrambled. Segments were rewritten mid-show. Editors rushed to dig up past clips of Jasmine Crockett, searching for patterns, trying to make sense of the sudden wave. But to viewers watching, it didn't require context. It was the context. Because most of them had been Jasmine Crockett or knew someone who had. The coworker. Overlooked for being too vocal, the parent told to be patient, while Systems failed their kids, the daughter who learned to stay quiet so the room didn't clutch its pearls, and now they'd watched someone. A black woman in power, not shrink, not soften, not wrap her truth in qualifying statements. She just said it, and she said it well. Something exploded. Not in outrage, but in identification. Threads were filled with comments like, "I've never watched a full political video until now." My abuela cried watching the subtitles. "Is she even real? This is the leader my daughter needs." Someone posted a side-by-side of Crockett's studio moment and Shirley Chisholm's 1972 speech to the DNC. It went viral with the caption, 50 years later, "The fire still burns." But this wasn't just about Crockett. It was about a hunger, a collective thirst for someone, anyone to speak what people whisper privately, tweet anonymously, and scream about in protest. Crockett didn't just voice outrage. She voiced purpose, and in doing so, she reminded people what courage looks like when it's well-spoken, not just well-branded. This wasn't a media moment. It was a cultural reset. Commentators debated, analysts dissected, think pieces popped up within hours, but the audience didn't need a headline to tell them what they felt. They already knew. She'd walked onto their screens and said what they'd been waiting to hear. That truth doesn't need approval before it's spoken. And dignity doesn't require assimilation to be valid. And just like that, a clip that could have ended as just another viral moment became something else, a signal flare. Crockett hadn't gone mainstream. She'd made the mainstream come to her. But what happened the next morning in Congress made it even bigger. Asterisk, asterisk, the next morning, the marble echo of the Capitol felt different. Staffers moved with their usual urgency, crisp suits, coffee cups, ever glancing at their watches, but beneath that bureaucratic rhythm, something had shifted. As Jasmine Crockett passed through security, 3 intern-aged aides standing near the cloakroom paused mid-conversation. "Did you see it?" One whispered, "No, I felt it." Another replied, "The clip had followed her here in the cafeteria." 2 veteran House members nodded as she walked by, a gesture of quiet recognition, not just for the words she spoke, but for daring to speak them there. In committee prep rooms, staffers refreshed trending hashtags while pretending to scan policy memos. And in one office, where a black and Puerto Rican comes, director watched the footage again with tears in his eyes. Someone slipped in and whispered, "She said what we've been trained to avoid our whole careers." Then came the floor speeches. One lawmaker from the Progressive Caucus took the mic mid-morning. "Last night, my colleague from Texas reminded us why we ran for office in the first place. This work isn't about optics. It's about truth. And sometimes, truth comes from the voices we were taught to talk over." Another older, more calculated offered praise through gritted eloquence. "We might not always agree on tone or timing, but Jasmine Crockett spoke with conviction. That's a rarity in these halls, and it's worth listening to." Even across the aisle, a handful bristled with public politeness, but avoided eye contact. They'd seen the clip too. They understood what it meant when a voice that isn't supposed to dominate does. And not by volume, but by value. Outside, the media gauntlet awaited. Cameras swung as she approached the Capitol steps. "Congresswoman, your thoughts on the viral moment? Did you mean to go off script last night? What's next for you?" She smiled, measured, firm. That was the script. We've just been reciting the wrong one for too long. As they shouted questions, she kept walking. Not avoiding. Just knowing this wasn't about another story cycle or a headline flurry. This was about something else entirely, something slower. Deeper, because the real shift wasn't in trending hashtags or cable segments. It was in the tremor of realignment, in the way authority started to look slightly different. For Crockett, the moment didn't mean she had arrived, only that she brought others with her. She walked the same Capitol hallways as her predecessors, Shirley, Barbara, Maxine. Not just in name, but in spirit. And like them, she carried the trauma of too many doors closed, and the resolve to open windows anyway. up in her office alone for a moment at last. She stood by the window and let herself feel it, not the spotlight. The silence that had come afterward. The silence that didn't rush to correct her, cut her off, or reshape her for consumption. She thought of her mother, of the sacrifices so rarely televised, of late nights studying legal briefs in rooms where she was the only one who looked like her, of courtrooms that assumed credibility only when spoken in baritone. She thought of how many black women she knew who were told to soften, to shrink, to translate themselves into something easier. She never signed up for easy. If her life had a pattern, it was this. When the world asked her to prove she belonged, she reminded it that she never needed permission to speak, the truth it already knew. She didn't go viral. She reminded millions of what heart looks like when wrapped in intellect, and what dignity sounds like when it refuses decorum. And if you listened closely, you didn't just hear a congresswoman, you heard a chorus breaking through. Authenticity beats approval. Dignity is not optional. And when black women speak, America needs to listen, not interrupt. Now, the question wasn't whether Jasmine Crockett had arrived. It was how the country would respond. From backstage whispers to live studio chaos, from sly baiting to a silence that shook the air, Jasmine Crockett didn't just show up for a panel, she showed up for a generation. We watched the framing unfold, the trap set with a smile. We saw the quiet push to make her explain herself, to soften, to comply. And then the monologue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flip the table. She simply spoke the truth without apology. About race. About equity. About what it means to be told you're too bold in a world that's been too quiet for too long. Her words weren't just political. They were personal. And they hit because they echoed what so many of us have felt, that if you don't fit the mold, they'll try to silence you, that if you speak clearly, they'll call you emotional, that if you carry truth, they'll call it dangerous. So ask yourself, who gets silenced in every room? Who gets to decide what's respectable? And what could happen if we stopped asking for permission to tell the truth? Jasmine Crockett didn't go viral because she made noise. She went viral because she made sense. In a world begging for clarity, for courage, for something real, and if you felt something, if you saw yourself in her, then stand with her. Share this moment. Spread the clip. Say her name, not because she needs a spotlight, but because this country needs a mirror. Courage doesn't always yell. Sometimes it just tells the truth out loud. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs it. Join the conversation in the comments, in your community, in yourself, because the silence is over. We are not done speaking.